trying to pay for a can of formula. I walked closer and froze. It was my daughter. She was supposed to be living comfortably at her husband's family home in another city right now. I pulled her aside, and the moment she saw me, she burst into tears. "Dad, they abandoned me here," she sobbed, as the baby girl in her arms started crying too. My blood boiled. I took her to a safe place and made a phone call. They messed with the wrong person. Welcome to Dad's Revenge Stories. I am incredibly grateful to have you here. To help us grow, please drop a comment showing which city or country you are watching from today. Note: this story includes fictionalized elements for entertainment and education. Any similarity to actual names or settings is coincidental, but the message is highly valuable. The hotel room was too quiet. I had stayed in hundreds of rooms like this one over the past 30 years. King-sized bed with crisp white linens, a minibar I never touched, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking whatever city I happened to be in that week. The Harborview Inn in Myrtle Cove, South Carolina, was no different, except that tonight, the quiet felt heavier than usual. It pressed against my chest, like something I could not name. I stood at the window with my hands in my pockets, looking out at the dark stretch of the Atlantic Ocean. The town was small, the kind of place where the grocery store closed at 10, and everybody knew everybody else's business by Tuesday morning. I had not chosen Myrtle Cove for its charm. I had chosen it because of a name that kept appearing in the wrong places. 3 weeks ago, my financial analyst had flagged an anomaly in a routine audit. A regional development company called Coastal Meridian LLC was quietly purchasing commercial property along the South Carolina shoreline. The purchases were structured in an unusual pattern, small tranches rotating through 4 different subsidiary accounts, timed to avoid federal reporting thresholds. The kind of paperwork that was designed to look ordinary to anyone who was not paying close attention. I was always paying close attention. When I dug deeper, Coastal Meridian LLC traced back through 2 layers of shell corporations to a holding company registered in Delaware. That holding company had the same registered agent as 3 other entities I recognized immediately, entities connected to the Belmont family of New York. I pressed my forehead briefly against the cold glass of the window. Victoria Belmont, the woman who had assured me with a warm smile and a firm handshake that her son Julian was the right man for my daughter Clara. The woman who had sat across from me at a dinner table in Manhattan 18 months ago and told me she thought of Clara as her own daughter. I had believed her. That was the part I could not forgive myself for. 3 weeks ago, when I told Victoria I was concerned about Clara, that her calls had become less frequent, that something in her voice sounded distant and strained, Victoria had been perfectly calm. "Clara is resting, Richard," she had told me. Her therapist recommended a private wellness retreat. No outside contact for 60 days. She asked us to let you know she was fine. She had even sent me a printed letter, supposedly from Clara, asking me not to worry. The handwriting was close, but it was not my daughter's. I had spent 2 weeks trying to convince myself I was wrong. Clara was an adult. She had built a life with Julian. I had promised myself I would not be the kind of father who suffocated his child with worry. But every morning I woke up with the same cold weight in my stomach, the same voice telling me that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. So I came to South Carolina. Not because I had proof, because I had a feeling I had learned over 62 years of life never to ignore. I turned away from the window and picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. The room was too quiet, and I was too restless for another night of staring at financial documents and telling myself to be patient. There was a grocery store 2 blocks from the hotel. I had passed it when the car dropped me off that afternoon. I needed antacids and something cold to drink, and honestly, I needed to be somewhere with other people, even strangers, even just for 20 minutes. The November air hit me the moment I stepped outside, sharp and salt-edged, the kind of cold that came off the ocean and got into your collar, no matter how well you buttoned your coat. The main street of Myrtle Cove was nearly empty at this hour. A diner on the corner still had its lights on. A couple walked their dog on the opposite sidewalk. The town had the particular stillness of a place that had already settled in for the night. The grocery store was called Henderson's Market. The sign above the entrance was missing the letter E in market, so it read Henderson's Marked in faded red lettering. The automatic door stuttered when it opened, catching for half a second before sliding the rest of the way. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. A teenager was mopping the floor near the produce section with the exhausted expression of someone counting down the minutes to the end of a shift. I picked up a basket and moved down the first aisle. The store was nearly empty. An older man was studying the labels on soup cans with the serious concentration of a scholar. A woman with two young boys trailing behind her was comparing prices on cereal boxes. The whole place smelled like floor cleaner and overripe bananas, and there was a country song playing softly through a speaker somewhere near the ceiling that kept cutting in and out. I found the antacids in aisle 4 and was reaching for a bottle of sparkling water when I heard it coming from the direction of the checkout lanes at the front of the store. A baby crying. Not the casual, fussing kind of cry that babies made when they were bored or tired. This was the sharp, insistent cry of a newborn who had not eaten. I had not heard that sound in 30 years, but a man does not forget it. It hit something old and deep in my chest. And then, underneath the crying, a woman's voice, low and desperate, trembling at the edges, in the way that a person's voice trembled when they were trying not to completely fall apart in public. "Please," she was saying. "Please, can you try it one more time? I know it should work. Please." I set the sparkling water down and walked toward the front of the store. There were 2 checkout lanes open. The lane on the left had the older man with his soup cans. The lane on the right, I stopped walking. A woman stood at the register. She was thin in a way that was not healthy, wearing a gray sweater that was 2 sizes too large for her, and jeans that had been washed so many times the knees had gone pale. Her hair was pulled back roughly, not styled, just pushed away from her face like she had done it in the dark. She was holding an infant against her left shoulder, and the baby was crying with the full force of a small body that had been hungry for too long. On the counter in front of her was a single can of infant formula. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, was shaking her head with the uncomfortable expression of someone who genuinely wished they could do something different. "Honey, I ran it twice. The cards coming back declined. I'm sorry." "I don't understand," the woman said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "It had a balance this morning. I checked it this morning." I took another step closer, and the fluorescent light shifted, and I saw her face. My sparkling water bottle hit the floor. The sound it made when it bounced was very loud in the quiet store. The woman at the register turned at the noise, and our eyes met across 6 feet of linoleum flooring, and the entire world compressed into a single terrible second. I knew that face. I had known that face since the moment a nurse placed a 7-pound, 2-ounce baby girl into my arms in a hospital in Manhattan 31 years ago. And I had looked down and understood for the first time in my life what it meant to love something more than yourself. "Clara," I said. The word came out of me like a breath I had been holding for months. My daughter stared at me. Her lips parted. And then her face broke open completely, every wall she had been holding up collapsing at once, and she said the only word she could manage. "Dad." She said it again, softer this time, like she was not sure the word was still allowed to belong to her. "Dad." I crossed the distance between us in 4 steps. I did not think about it. I did not plan it. My body simply moved the way it had moved 31 years ago, when a 2-year-old Clara had wobbled off a playground step, and I had caught her before she hit the ground. Pure reflex, pure need, the oldest instinct a father carries. I put my arms around her, and she collapsed into me. The baby, my granddaughter, though my mind was still struggling to hold that word, was pressed between us, and she let out a sharp, startled cry at the sudden closeness. Clara was shaking. Not shivering from the cold, but shaking from somewhere much deeper, the kind of trembling that happens when a person has been holding themselves together by sheer force of will for so long that the moment someone else shows up, every muscle they have been clenching simply gives out at once. "I've got you," I said into her hair. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Clara, I've got you. I'm right here." She did not speak for a long moment. She pressed her face against my shoulder and made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not quite a sob, not quite a cry. Something more broken than either of those things, like a sound that had been trapped inside her chest for weeks and had finally found the only exit it recognized. The cashier had gone very still behind the register. The teenager who had been mopping the floor near the entrance had stopped moving entirely, leaning on his mop handle and looking at the floor with the careful, deliberate focus of someone pretending they were somewhere else. I loosened my arms just enough to look at her. She was so thin. That was the thing that hit me harder even than the worn-out clothes or the exhaustion carved into her face. Clara had always been slender, but she had been healthy, bright-eyed, and sure of herself, the kind of young woman who walked into a room and took up exactly the space she was entitled to. The woman standing in front of me had been hollowed out. Her cheekbones were too sharp. Her wrists, where they wrapped around the baby, were fragile in a way that made something behind my sternum clench painfully. "Let me take her," I said, reaching for the baby. "Let me hold her so you can breathe." Clara hesitated for just a fraction of a second, the hesitation of a mother who had learned the hard way that she was the only person her child could count on. Then she transferred the baby into my arms with the careful, practiced motion of someone who had done it 1,000 times in the past few months. The baby was tiny. Far too tiny, it seemed to me, though I knew newborns were supposed to be small. She was wrapped in a receiving blanket that had been washed so many times it had gone thin, and her face was scrunched and red from crying, her small mouth working urgently, searching. She could not have been more than 4 or 5 months old. "Her name is Lily," Clara said. Her voice was steadier now, but only barely. "She was born in August. While I had been sitting in board meetings and flying between New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, my daughter had given birth to this child somewhere I had not known about, in circumstances I had not known about, and had spent the months since then fighting to keep both of them alive. "Hello, Lily," I said quietly. My granddaughter's face was still scrunched with hunger and displeasure, and she was not remotely interested in being soothed by a stranger. But I held her firmly against my chest, the way I had held Clara 31 years ago, and I felt her tiny body register the warmth and the steadiness and begin very reluctantly to stop fighting quite so hard. I turned to the cashier. "The formula," I said. "Ring it up, please." And anything else she came in for. The cashier, her name tag said. Donna reached for the can of formula with the efficient compassion of someone who had seen hard times walk through her checkout lane before. "That's the only thing, sir," she said, glancing at Clara. "Just the one can." "Add whatever formula you have in stock behind the counter," I said. "The same brand, if you have it. 3 cans. Dad, you don't have to." "Clara." I said her name quietly, and she stopped. Not because I was silencing her, but because she heard something in the way I said it. The same thing she had heard in my voice when she was 7 years old, and had tried to tell me she was not scared of the thunderstorm keeping her awake at 3 in the morning. She had always been able to tell when I was holding something back so she would not have to carry it. I handed my credit card to Donna without looking at the total. While Donna processed the transaction, I looked at my daughter properly for the first time. The fluorescent light above us was doing her no favors, but even in that harsh light, even with everything the past months had taken from her, I could see her, the real her, the one I had raised, still present underneath all of it. The line of her jaw, the way she stood with her shoulders slightly back even when she was exhausted, a habit she had inherited from her mother. The look in her eyes that was not defeat, not quite, but something that had been pressed very close to it for a very long time. "How long?" I asked. I kept my voice low and even. "How long have you been here in this town?" Clara looked down at the counter. Her fingers found the edge of the conveyor belt and held on. "About a month," she said. "Since mid-October." A month. October. 31 days during which I had accepted the explanation I was given because I had not wanted to be the father who could not let his daughter live her own life. 31 days during which Lily had been 4 months old, then 4.5 months old, growing in whatever conditions this town had offered them. "Where have you been staying?" I asked. Clara lifted her eyes to mine, and the look on her face told me the answer was going to be something I was not prepared for, something that was going to require every ounce of composure I had spent 6 decades learning how to maintain. "I'll show you," she said. "But Dad..." She reached out and touched my arm just lightly, just her fingertips. "I need you to hold it together when you see it. For Lily's sake. She picks up on everything." I looked down at the baby in my arms. Lily had finally stopped crying. Her eyes were closed, her small chest rising and falling with the particular exhausted peace of a child who has worn herself out. She weighed almost nothing, and she trusted me completely, the way babies trusted anyone who held them warmly and steadily, with no understanding yet of how rarely the world deserved that kind of trust. "I'll hold it together," I told my daughter. I meant it when I said it. But as Donna handed back my card and bagged the formula cans, and as Clara picked up the bags with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, and as I followed my daughter out of Henderson's Market into the sharp November air with my granddaughter against my chest, I was already bracing myself, because I knew my daughter. And if she was warning me to hold it together, then whatever I was about to see was going to make holding it together the hardest thing I had ever done. My car was a black Lincoln Navigator that my assistant had arranged through a local rental agency when I landed in Myrtle Cove 3 days ago. It was the kind of vehicle that felt out of place on these narrow coastal streets, too polished, too large, too certain of itself, against the backdrop of a town that had seen better decades. I buckled Lily into the back seat, using the infant carrier that Clara produced from a battered canvas bag, her fingers moving through the familiar snaps and adjustments, with the automatic efficiency of a mother who had done it in the dark, in the cold, in conditions I had not yet seen, but was already beginning to dread. Clara sat beside her daughter in the back. She gave me directions in a quiet, flat voice left at the stop sign: follow the road past the hardware store. Turn right, where the street light was out. The street light had apparently been out for weeks. Nobody had fixed it. I drove slowly. The town thinned out as we moved away from the main street, the buildings becoming fewer and farther between the road surface, deteriorating from cracked asphalt to packed dirt with ruts that made the Navigator rock gently from side to side. Lily had fallen asleep again, her head lolling against the padded side of the carrier, with the absolute boneless trust of an infant who had finally eaten and could afford to let go for a while. "Here," Clara said. "Pull over here." I pulled over. I looked through the windshield, and I did not speak for a moment, because I was doing the thing she had asked me to do, holding it together. The structure in front of us was a construction project that had been abandoned midway through its 2nd or 3rd floor. Concrete pillars rose up from the ground at regular intervals, supporting a poured ceiling above, but the walls between the pillars had never been built. There were no windows. There were no doors. The ground floor was open on all 4 sides to the November wind coming off the ocean, which tonight had a particular cutting quality that found every gap in a person's clothing and worked its way in. A section of temporary construction fencing had been knocked down on the left side. Overgrown grass and a few stubborn weeds pushed up through cracks in the concrete floor near the entrance. I cut the engine. "Clara," I said. "I know," she said. "Come inside. I want you to see it properly." I did not want to see it properly. Every instinct I had was telling me to put the car back in drive, get on the highway, and put as many miles between my daughter and this place as possible before either of us said another word. But Clara was already opening the car door, and I understood that she needed me to see it, not because she wanted my horror or my guilt, but because she needed someone who loved her to bear witness to what she had survived. So I got out of the car. The wind hit me immediately. It was rawer out here than it had been in town, unobstructed by buildings carrying the particular damp cold of the South Carolina coast in late autumn. I followed Clara through the gap in the fencing and into the open ground floor of the unfinished building. It was darker inside than outside, if that was possible. The concrete pillars cast irregular shadows, and the ceiling above us blocked what little light came from the stars. Clara pulled a small flashlight from her canvas bag, a cheap hardware store flashlight, the kind that came in a 3-pack, and clicked it on. The beam was narrow but steady. She walked me to the far corner of the ground floor, where one of the concrete pillars created a slight angle that broke some of the wind, and she shone the flashlight down. I looked at what was on the ground. Then I crouched down beside it, because I needed to be closer, because some part of me was insisting that I was misreading what I was seeing. I was not misreading it. There was a flattened cardboard box spread across the concrete, 2 of them actually layered on top of each other, for what I imagined passed for cushioning. On top of the cardboard was a sleeping bag that had once been blue and was now a faded, indeterminate gray, its zipper broken so that it lay open like a blanket. Beside the sleeping bag was a small stack of items arranged with the kind of deliberate, exhausted neatness of someone who had very little and had learned to keep careful track of all of it. 2 clean onesies folded precisely, a travel-size container of baby wipes, a half-empty package of diapers, a small Ziploc bag containing what looked like a few crackers, and a granola bar. And underneath the edge of the cardboard, where someone had thought to put it for waterproofing, was a single flattened plastic garbage bag. My granddaughter had been sleeping on cardboard on a concrete floor in a building with no walls for 31 days. I pressed my hand flat against the surface of the cardboard. It was cold and slightly damp at the edges where the wind